Hi everyone, welcome to the online training for the Comprehensive Assessment of Team Member Effectiveness System, or CATME system. Before we begin, let's discuss our agenda. Today, we'll be discussing what it means to perform well in project teams. Specifically, we're going to discuss the concept of team performance, then we'll review an evidence-based model of teamwork, and finally, we'll practice using this model to evaluate two team members' performance. Alright, let's get started. First off, it's important for us to define what we mean by team member performance. Performance, at least in a team setting, reflects behaviors that team members do that help the group or team reach its goals. When we think of team member performance, we have to keep in mind that it consists of not one thing, but many things. For example, a good team member on a soccer team may do a lot of different things. She may be good at dribbling the soccer ball, and she may also be good at slide tackling. Similarly, when evaluating the performance of our peers in project teams, we can't rely on a single piece of information. We have to consider multiple aspects of performance. This sounds complicated, but you can probably think of teammates you've had in the past who were good at some things that help the team achieve its goals, but not so good at others. For example, you might have worked with someone who's especially adept at keeping the team focused, but may not have had all the skills required to complete the assignment or the project. Because team performance consists of many things, it is useful to have a model or framework to help us keep all the information straight. The CATME system is based on a model of team member performance that consists of 5 dimensions. These include contributing to the team's work, interacting with teammates, keeping the team on track, expecting quality, and having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs. Now, keep in mind that there are different models of team performance. However, for the purposes of today's training, this is the model that we'd like you to use. It's also what you'll be using during some upcoming exercises. That is, we'll be asking you to use these 5 dimensions to evaluate some team members' performance. Don't worry though, we'll practice first before we get to that point. Let's spend a few minutes going over each of these dimensions of team member performance and talk about how we define them. One of the first criteria for determining how well someone is performing as a team member is if they're contributing to the team's work. This dimension is defined as helps team achieve its goals or objectives by completing tasks assigned to the team. Now this dimension has a wide variety of behaviors that could be associated with it. Here we have a few behaviors that exemplify performance on this dimension. It's important to note these behaviors are examples. That is, they represent key aspects of performance that fall under this category. Some examples of behaviors are keeps commitments and completes assignments on time. Others are makes important contributions that improve the team's work, or maybe does not assist teammates, quits if the work becomes difficult. You'll notice that some of these behaviors reflect high, medium, and low performance. For medium performance, you can imagine someone who completes a fair share of the team's work with acceptable quality. For high performance, someone is performing exceptionally well, does more or higher quality work than expected. And then finally, a team member who is performing poorly would be someone who misses deadlines, is late, unprepared, or absent for team meetings. Although these behaviors range from high, medium, and low levels of performance, you should keep in mind that they're only examples. Usually we see a variety of behaviors and often have to combine them to give someone an overall or a total score. So sometimes you'll see both positive and negative behaviors. These different behaviors will need to be combined. If you see a really low behavior and a moderate behavior, then this person might deserve a score of 2. So for the next dimension, interacting with teammates, this is defined as provides positive interactions within the team that contribute to a supportive environment. And again, when we think of this dimension, there are a number of different behaviors that could serve as examples. And with these different examples, we have examples of moderate performance, to high performance, to low performance. So for moderate performance, you might have something like communicates clearly. For high performance, asks teammates for feedback and uses their suggestions to improve. And for low performance, is defensive, will not accept help or advice from teammates. The next dimension, keeping the team on track, is defined as monitors teams and teammates' progress and ensures that they are meeting necessary deadlines. And again, when we think of this dimension, there are a number of behaviors that could serve as examples. For medium levels of performance, you might have something like notices changes that influence the team's success. For high level performance, you could have make sure that teammates are making appropriate progress. And for low levels of performance, avoids discussing team's problems even when they are obvious. For the next dimension, we have expecting quality. And this dimension is defined as reviews teams' work and products to ensure they are setting and meeting standards. And when we think of expecting quality, there are again example behaviors that we can think of. Things like believes that the team can fully meet its responsibilities, motivates the team to do excellent work, or satisfied even if the team does not meet assigned standards. And again, for each of these example behaviors, they can be classified as high, medium, or low performance. Finally, for having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities, or this fifth dimension, this is defined as possessing necessary competencies, that is those knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs, to help the team achieve its goals. And again, there are a variety of behaviors that could serve as examples for this dimension. At the moderate level, you might have something like able to perform some of the tasks normally done by other team members. At a high level, you could have demonstrates the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do excellent work. And at a low level, unable to perform any of the duties of other team members. So now that we've discussed how we define team member performance and reviewed behaviors that reflect good, moderate, and poor performance, let's practice using the dimension to evaluate a team member. You should have a copy of what we're calling the Teamwork Rating Scale. This scale summarizes everything we just discussed and is yours to keep. You'll see that we have, going across the top of the rating scale, are 5 dimensions in each of the columns. And then for the rows, there are the 5 levels of performance that we discussed. And then in any given box or any given cell for the rating scale, we have examples of behaviors for high, medium, or low levels of performance. Again, keep in mind the behaviors in a given box or cell are just examples. They're designed to serve as prototypical behavior that you can refer back to when evaluating someone's performance. Also, you can provide a score of 2 and 4 if the combination of behaviors you observe equals these values. So, for example, if you observe a behavior for contributing to team's work that suggests really low performance or really poor performance, that is, it merits a score of 1, and you observe a behavior that reflects moderate performance, that is a score of 3, you can provide this person with a score of 2 for contributing to the team's work. Okay, let's practice using this rating scale to evaluate an imaginary team member named Robin Brown. Imagine you're working with Robin on a project and you see these various behaviors. Now imagine that you've been asked to give Robin feedback. Using the dimensions of teamwork that we just discussed, we can provide very clear ratings of performance. So let's walk through this together. For this first behavior, routinely late to team meetings, which category or dimension of performance does this reflect? So this would be categorized as contributing to the team's work. And when we think of this behavior, that is routinely late to team meetings, does this reflect high, medium, or low performance? That is, would you rate this a score of 5, 3, or 1? So this behavior would be an example of low performance. Okay, so what about the next behavior? Respects other team members' opinions. First off, which dimension does this behavior refer to? So this behavior falls under interacting with teammates. And does this behavior reflect high, medium, or low performance? That is, would you rate this behavior a 5, 3, or 1? Right, so this behavior would reflect a 3. And if the next behavior relies on extensive computer skills to complete team assignments, which category are we talking about here? So this would be having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities. And if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, what level of performance would this reflect? So this would be high performance. And then the next behavior does not mention problems right away, but later comments about having noticed those issues. Does this reflect, which of the 5 dimensions does this reflect? So this would fall under keeping the team on track. And if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, what score would you provide? So this would be a score of 1 for poor performance. And how about demonstrates outstanding mathematics skills? Which category does this reflect? So this would be having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities. And then if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, which level would you choose? So high performance. And then if we think of the next behavior, rarely checks on progress of other team members, which category does this fall under? So this would be keeping the team on track. And if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, so this would be low performance. And for the next behavior, finishes work as quickly as possible without regard for whether it is done correctly, which category would this fall under? All right, so this would be expecting quality. And if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, be low performance. And then make statements indicating a greater concern for just getting done rather than ensuring a quality job. Does this reflect which category does this reflect? All right, so this would be expecting quality. And if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, low performance. And then the next behavior, listens to everyone. Which dimension does this reflect? So this would be interacting with teammates. And then if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, how would you rate this behavior? This would be moderate level of performance, or 3. And then finally, completes the tasks needed. Which dimension are we talking about? So this would be contributing to the team's work, and it would reflect high, medium, or low performance. So medium performance, or a score of 3. So now that we have an idea about which dimensions are reflected by which behaviors, and whether or not these behaviors reflect high, medium, or low performance, we can consider Robin's overall performance. So for the 2 behaviors associated with contributing to the team's work, that is, completes tasks needed and routinely late for meetings, would you say these generally reflect high, medium, or low performance? Because Robin is routinely late to team meetings, which we scored a 1, but completes the tasks that are needed, which we scored a 3, her score would fall somewhere between the lowest level of performance and a moderate level of performance for this dimension, that is, for contributing to the team's work. So the most appropriate rating for this dimension is a score of 2. And then for the next dimension, interacting with teammates, so because both behaviors were rated as a 3, this overall score for interacting with teammates will be rated as a 3. For keeping the team on track, it would be a score of 1. Expecting quality would again be a score of 1. Then having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities, this would be a score of 5. Okay. So keep in mind, when we are evaluating specific behaviors, we're only considering whether they are high, medium, or low levels of performance. So we only give specific behaviors scores of 1, 3, or 5. When we provide ratings for one of the 5 dimensions, that is, those broader categories, we can certainly combine different levels of performance to get scores of 2 and 4. Okay, so now that we've evaluated Rob and Brown's performance, I'm going to let you practice on your own by rating another team member. You should have a copy of the sheet that provides a list of behaviors for another team member. This person is named Taylor Lewis. Imagine you're working with Taylor and you view these various behaviors. What you'll need to do is assign each behavior to one of the dimensions under the category assignment column. Then, rate each behavior by providing a rating of either a 1, 3, or 5 using the teamwork rating scale. So you'll see we've completed an example item for you. The behavior sets goals and checkpoints to help the team falls under the keeping the team on track category. So we've labeled this behavior with a capital letter K under the category assignment column. This behavior also reflects a moderate level of performance and has been rated as a score of 3. You'll do the same process for the remaining behaviors. Finally, you'll need to provide an overall rating for each of the dimensions. This is the bottom half of the rating form. Again, you can use your teamwork rating scale to help you with this process. Okay, so take a few minutes to read over the description and decide how you would evaluate Taylor and fill out the rating sheet. Okay, so let's see how we did. We'll begin by reviewing the individual behaviors. So for the first behavior, writes down a checklist of what the team needs to get done for meetings. Which category would this fall under? So this falls under the keeping the team on track category. And how did you rate this behavior? Did you rate it in terms of high, medium, or low performance? So this reflects a high level of performance, so it deserves a score 5. And for the next behavior, completes any math required as part of the team's assignment. Which category would this fall under? This falls under contributing to the team's work. And how would you rate this behavior? High, medium, or low performance? So this would reflect a moderate level of performance. And then for the next behavior, fails to give status reports to other team members. Which dimension does this fall under? So this would be interacting with teammates. And does it reflect high, medium, or low performance? So this would reflect a low level of performance. And then for the next behavior, encourages the team to achieve its highest potential. Which category does it fall under? E for expecting quality. And then if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, it'd be a 5 for high performance. And how about communicates high expectations with regard to the quality of assignments? First, which dimension are we talking about? So again, this would be E for expecting quality. And if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, so this would be high performance. How about generates novel ideas that help the team? Which dimension are we talking about? So this would be contributing to the team's work. And would you say this reflects high, medium, or low performance? So high performance. And how about figures out how to do the math for assigned problems? Which category would this fall under? So this would fall under H for having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities. And would it reflect high, medium, or low performance? So medium performance. And how about listens to everyone's opinions? Which dimension would this fall under? So this is interacting with teammates. And then if we have this as high, medium, or low performance. So moderate level of performance. How about able to use base knowledge of computers in some assignments? So this would be having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities. And does it reflect high, medium, or low performance? So this would reflect moderate performance. And how about gives constructive feedback? Which dimension are we talking about? So this would be K for keeping the team on track. And if we think of this in terms of high, medium, or low performance, how would we categorize this? So high performance. So now that we have an understanding of, again, the different behaviors and which categories they fall into and the level of performance each behavior reflects, let's see what scores we gave Taylor for each dimension. For the first dimension, how would you rate contributing to the team's work? So this would reflect because Taylor generates ideas that help the team, but completes any math required as part of the team's assignment, her score would fall somewhere between the highest level of performance and a moderate level of performance. So that is, she would deserve a score of 4. Now, if your score is much higher or lower than a 4, then be sure to pay careful attention to the behaviors that are specific to a particular dimension. That is, don't consider behaviors that fall outside that category. Okay, for the next dimension, interacting with teammates, again, because we have a behavior that reflects low performance and a behavior that reflects moderate performance, this would deserve a score of 2. For the dimension keeping the team on track, both behaviors reflected high performance, so this would be a score of 5. Expecting quality would also be a score of 5, because both behaviors were rated as quite high. And then finally, having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities, both behaviors reflected moderate level of performance, and so Taylor deserves a score of 3. So interestingly, we can see that Taylor was a much better performer than Robin overall. However, there was one area where Robin did much better. If we think back to Robin's scores, she actually had a score of 5 on the having relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities, while Taylor received a score of 3. This highlights the importance of thinking about team performance along different dimensions and different categories. So this completes today's training. I hope you enjoyed the session and feel like you learned something. As a way of seeing how much information you retained and how prepared you are in using the CATME system, you'll next be asked to complete a brief assessment. You'll see that the assessment is very similar to the practice exercise we just completed, where we evaluated Taylor's performance. Before we go, I want to just remind you to use the information we've discussed today during this training while working in your team and in your classroom. It will hopefully make you a better teammate and allow you to provide better feedback to your peers.